I remember that fateful morning as vividly as if it happened yesterday. It was a quiet October morning, the Chicago sky heavy and gray, the clouds sagging low enough to brush against the city's tallest towers. I sat in my small apartment in River North, absently turning my coffee cup in my hands, my eyes fixed on the spreadsheet open across my laptop screen. The columns of numbers stretched endlessly, pulsing like erratic heartbeats, and somewhere within those thousands of lines, I had the uncanny ability to detect the one beat that was out of rhythm. A tiny inconsistency was enough to send a chill racing through me, like someone had just whispered a dangerous secret against my ear. I am a forensic data analyst. My work is dry to most people, tracking financial transactions, untangling the threads of vast money networks, peeling back the polished layers criminals hide behind. To outsiders, it's nothing but meaningless figures. To me, every number is a trace. Every entry has a voice. And I've learned how to listen. That skill didn't just help me in my profession, it saved my life, because it was the very thing that revealed to me that my father had not vanished naturally. My father, Richard Cross, was a retired aerospace engineer at 63. He lived with the discipline of a Swiss watch, up at 6 every morning, brewing black coffee, reading the paper, then taking his daily walk around Lincoln Park. The neighbors knew his schedule so well that they could tell the time by the moment he passed their gates. But 1 month ago, he went out for his usual walk and never came back. The Chicago police logged it as another missing person case. Maybe he got lost. Maybe he had an accident and fell into the river, they said with an indifferent shrug, as though it was nothing more than one of the dozens of disappearances the city racks up each month. But I knew my father was not the type to get lost. For him, unpredictability was the enemy, and routine was his closest ally. He would never disappear on a whim. What unsettled me even more was Victoria's reaction. Victoria Sterling, my stepmother, though I never once accepted her, even after 4 years of marriage to my father. She was 12 years his senior, a sharp-featured woman with eyes the cold shade of northern seas and a smile so carefully crafted it seemed etched into her face. From the moment she stepped into our home, she carried with her an air of luxury and suffocation, like velvet curtains that block out every bit of light. When the police announced my father's disappearance, I expected panic, grief, at least a tear from her. Instead, Victoria sat calmly in her armchair, pale hands resting against a crystal glass of red wine, her voice steady and unnervingly composed. Perhaps he just needed a change. Richard always said he wanted to go somewhere, escape this dull little cycle. I stared at her. Such a blatant lie. My father had never once uttered such a thought. And in that moment, I knew something darker was at play. My suspicion wasn't born from emotion. It came from data. I gained access to my father's bank accounts. Numbers never lie. And they told me a terrifying story. In the 3 weeks before his disappearance, there had been regular transfers to a strange account in Florida. Each transaction was only a few $1,000s, but together they amounted to a significant sum. Beyond that, there had been an abrupt change to his life insurance policy. The primary beneficiary had been switched, and the name, of course, was Victoria Sterling. That wasn't all. I uncovered a scanned copy of a new will, dated just 3 weeks before my father vanished. That document nearly stripped me of all inheritance, instead granting bizarre and lopsided privileges to Victoria. You didn't need to be an analyst to see the pattern. Secret transfers, altered insurance, a rewritten will, it all pointed to a single scenario, a plan to remove my father. I still remember the last time I saw him, just a day before he disappeared. He sat in the living room, hands trembling slightly but his eyes as sharp as ever. He said to me, "Nathaniel, you must always trust the numbers." People can lie with words, but the numbers, they never conceal the truth. At the time, I didn't understand why he stressed that point. Now, it echoes in my mind like a final warning. 1 week after his disappearance, I received a call from Victoria. Her voice was soft, almost syrupy. "Nathaniel, come have dinner with me this Friday. It's the anniversary of your father's and my marriage. We should honor him." I froze. In every syllable I could hear an unnerving confidence, as though she already knew I wouldn't refuse. A family dinner. Under these circumstances, it sounded like nothing less than an invitation to an execution. But I agreed, not because I wanted to celebrate, but because I needed to look her in the eye, to see how much darkness that practiced smile of hers could hide. That night I arrived at the Winnetka estate exactly at 7. The mansion glowed like a fortress, tall windows blazing golden light across the silent gardens. As I stepped inside, the air was thick with expensive perfume and oak wood, stifling and suffocating. Victoria appeared in a crimson silk dress, platinum hair perfectly curled. She smiled, eyes glinting as if welcoming an honored guest rather than her missing husband's son. "You came, Nathaniel," she said, her voice sweet as honey laced with venom. "I knew you wouldn't leave me alone on such a special night." I nodded, concealing the shiver that crawled down my spine. Throughout dinner, Victoria chatted gaily, describing her plans to renovate the house, to travel once things settled down. Not a single word about my father, except for one offhand remark. Richard was always too tense. Perhaps he finally found his freedom. I stayed silent, watching every gesture, every flicker in her eyes. With each passing minute, the room seemed to close in tighter. And then, the moment arrived. Victoria lifted a bottle of Bordeaux, filling 2 crystal glasses. She slid one across the table toward me, her eyes flashing with something sharp, predatory. "To family," she said, lips curling into a mysterious smile. I glanced at the glass. On its surface was the faint shimmer of a thin film, catching the light, the liquid's texture slightly off. To anyone else, it was just wine. But to me, a man trained to notice the smallest anomalies, it was a blaring red signal. I raised my eyes to hers. In that instant, I knew. This glass wasn't meant for her. It was meant for me. And when she turned to retrieve her own, I made my decision. Quick, silent, precise. I switched the glasses. By the time she faced me again, I sat calmly, lifting the other glass. Our eyes locked, unblinking. "To family," she repeated, her voice steeped in certainty. I tilted my lips into a faint smile and answered, "To the truth." The instant Victoria's glass touched her lips, my heart stuttered. Every sound around me fell away until all I could hear was the frantic thud of my own blood. I watched her take that sip, the corner of her mouth lifting in the small, satisfied smile of someone who thinks they've won. She had no idea that, a heartbeat before, I had swapped the 2 glasses. My plan had been in motion for days, seeded the moment the messy financial ledgers stopped being able to hide the truth. Strange transfers, forged signatures on my father's paperwork. Each discovery made my skin crawl. I copied everything, sent the files to David Kellerman. At first, he looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Then his face drained. He set a hand on my shoulder in that grave way people do when they suddenly understand the stakes and told me to be extremely careful. I didn't need him to say it. I already understood. I'd installed a covert voice-activated recorder on my phone. I'd scheduled a timed message to David. If he hadn't, he heard from me by 11, he was to initiate Plan B. During dinner, Victoria chattered as if nothing at all had happened. She spoke of renovations, of trips she'd take once things quiet down, of a bright new future. Every casual sentence was a small knife twisting in my chest, because in the future she painted, My father did not exist. I kept my voice steady, but my hand under the table clenched so hard my nails cut into my palm. I told her that families survive on steadiness, and I pinned her with my gaze. I knew then I had found a pressure point she'd been hiding. Half an hour passed. I began to doubt myself. Had I imagined the poison? She asked me if I felt warm. I answered coolly that I felt fine. I deliberately dropped son and said, I. That small distance, an intentional formality, felt like a blade severing the pretense of family. Her hand trembled. The wine in her glass shimmered. 10 minutes later, she collapsed across the table. Glass shattered, the dark liquid spreading across the linen like spilled blood. Then I dialed David and said 4 words. Start it. Now. I leaned close enough for the medtech to hear and said, slow and clear, Victoria, you did this to yourself. At 3 in the morning, the preliminary toxicology came back. Rohypnol. Enough to render a person unconscious for hours. If I hadn't swapped the glasses, I would be lying in a hospital bed right now, helpless. David arrived that night with a stack of paperwork. A court order to seal the Winnetka estate, an authorization to test for toxins, and motions to freeze Victoria's accounts. Everything had been queued, waiting for the moment to flip the board. Even half-conscious, she clung weakly to my sleeve, whispering brokenly, I don't understand. I only wanted our family. I looked into her clouded eyes and saw nothing but calculated fog and falsehood. I bent close and said, each syllable hard as a stone, family is not a game. My father was never a pawn in yours. Her hand slipped from mine and fell limp to the stretcher. The next morning, the forensics team swept the house. They found a bottle of Rohypnol in the bathroom cabinet, documents forged in my father's signature, and a $2 million life insurance policy altered just weeks before he went missing. When the detective held those pages out to me, I closed my fists on the armchair until my knuckles ached. The pieces were assembling into a picture I had dreaded. But one question throbbed in my skull. Where was my father? In the afternoon, Detective Sarah Chen came to see me. Her eyes were heavy. We just uncovered human remains buried in the Day Plains Preserve, she said. We'll need DNA, but the circumstantial evidence suggests it's your father. Something like a blade slid through my chest. Prepared for the worst or not, hearing it aloud was something else entirely. This was no longer suspicion. This was murder. That night I sat in my dark apartment, the laptop screen painting lines of spreadsheets on the walls, but I couldn't see the numbers. Only my father's face appeared, stern, gentle, the last image of him saying, "Trust the data. Numbers don't lie." I whispered, voice breaking, "I promise, Dad. I won't let the truth be buried, even if I have to pull the whole world down to show it." Outside, the city roared on indifferent. Inside my cramped room, a vow echoed louder than the traffic. I will expose Victoria, whatever it takes. The fight had only just begun. When the DNA results confirmed my father was dead, there was no room left for doubt. Everything fell like a steel hammer, cold and heavy. I stood at the hospital window as fluorescent light washed the glass in sickly white streaks, my heart thudding in my ears like a war drum. Robert Hale, the methodical father, disciplined as a Swiss watch, was now only cold bones unearthed from damp earth. I didn't cry. I wouldn't allow myself to. The pain hardened into a viscous lava that ran through my veins, burning every nerve. Victoria was still alive, still breathing, while my father lay buried like a nameless thing. The injustice made my chest tighten until I nearly couldn't breathe. I replayed every detail, every sign. The way she smiled at dinner, the way she feigned to raise a toast while hiding a death that had been calculated in advance. She had assumed I was a gullible stepchild, too naive to understand the game of power she played. It was that contempt that proved her fatal flaw. I had seen the thin film on the wine. I had switched the glasses. Now the poison ran in her bloodstream, a living witness to her own crime. As the police sealed the house, I stood there watching every evidence box carried out. Among them was a small black leather notebook, hidden in a bedroom drawer. The pages were crowded with cramped, deliberate handwriting, notes on transfers, lists of passwords, and timestamps of tests. My hands trembled as I read. My father had not died instantly. He had been experimented on like a lab animal. Doses of antifreeze adjusted, reactions logged meticulously. I felt sick and had to lean on a table to stay upright. Detective Chen stood beside me and gave a small, curt nod. She didn't need to speak. I knew I was the only one who could fit these scattered fragments into a coherent picture. This was the work I'd done my whole life, recognizing patterns in chaotic data. Only this time the data were about my father's life and death. That night I sat in my apartment and reopened every file I'd archived. Bank statements, amended contracts, the odd password changes. I stitched them together on the screen into a monstrous map, lines crisscrossing like a spider's web. In the center was a single name: Victoria Sterling. She was the sole beneficiary of my father's death. She was the linchpin, and she had left behind an irrefutable piece of evidence: the glass I had switched. David called near midnight. His voice was tired but steady. He said the press was starting to stir. The papers were circling the story of the cold, beautiful socialite now suspected of murdering her husband for inheritance. I answered simply, "The more light, the better. The truth needs to be seen." After the call, I looked at myself in the mirror. My face was hollow, eyes rimmed dark but burning with intent. I was no longer just the awkward data analyst who hid behind spreadsheets. I was something else now, a man with a mission. My father deserved justice. The next day, I went to the hospital. Victoria lay there under watch, pallid, but still with that familiar look of disdain when she saw me. She gave me a thin, poisonous laugh. "You think you're clever? It'll all come back to haunt you." I stepped close and leaned in so only she could hear. "No, Victoria. You're wrong. It will come back on you. That glass wasn't given to you by me. It was lifted by you. I only made you face the truth." She trembled, her eyes darting. For a moment I saw fear flicker there, then it was smothered by hatred. She croaked, hoarse and low, "You'll pay for this." I smiled, cold. Leaving the hospital, Chicago felt altered. The wind bit my face, but everything was clearer than before. I was no longer merely a son searching for a father. I was the man unmasking a killer, one step at a time, and I would not stop until justice was done. That night, while the city slept, I sat at my desk and would not stop staring at the screen. Time ceased to have meaning. Each data set I linked, each shard of evidence I joined, brought me closer to that final moment, the moment when truth would shatter every lie. In the dark, I whispered to my father, "I will bring the light, Dad. I won't let your name be buried by crime. I will end her game." Outside, wind tore through empty streets like a distant echo of a sentence already written. I remember that evening as if it happened yesterday. Victoria phoned me earlier in the week, her voice syrupy and contrived, inviting me to dinner at the suburban estate. I knew it was a trap, and precisely for that reason I couldn't say no. On the drive over, my heart kept striking my ribs like a countdown clock. The road into the estate lay silent under the night. The yellow street lamps stretched like punctuation marks across a black page. I stopped at the iron gate. The security camera swung toward me, and the gate eased open with a creak. Ceremony and inevitability rolled into one. Victoria was waiting at the door in a red velvet dress, her smile all calculation. I stepped inside. I took my seat at the long table draped in white linen. Everything was laid out with fastidious care. Porcelain, gleaming silver, crystal that caught the light. At the head she poured 2 glasses of wine. The wine curled into deep red spirals in the crystal as she pushed a glass toward me. I picked it up and studied the surface. For a breath I thought I saw a thin film shimmer and disappear, like a ghost. My stomach dropped, but I gave nothing away. When she turned to fetch her own glass, I switched them in the space of a heartbeat. Smooth, practiced, automatic. She lifted her glass, bright smile shining. The glasses chimed together, glass on glass, a fragile toll. Her voice had the evenness of someone speaking of things that never were. In her timeline, Robert never existed, as if my father had become a shadow erased by convenience. My phone sat in my jacket with the recorder engaged, ready to catch any phrase. The timed message had been dispatched. If I didn't cancel before 11, David would receive everything. I too'd prepared for the worst, even the possibility I wouldn't just be alive to tell the tale. I began to wonder if I'd been wrong, if the oddity on the wine's surface had been my imagination. I kept my face neutral, listened to her chatter. Then, suddenly, her hand twitched and a knife clattered to the tiled floor. The metallic sound cut the air clean. 10 minutes later, she collapsed onto the table. The thud of her head against the mahogany made the hairs on my arms rise. Glass shattered. The dark liquid pooled and spread, mingling with the froth at her lips. 911. There's someone unconscious at my house. Possible poisoning. Please send help now, I said, my voice the careful alarm of a worried son, letting just enough tremor show to be convincing. Then I rang David. Started. 15 minutes later, the ambulance sirens wailed. EMTs rushed in and lifted Victoria, half unconscious. I stood aside, stunned-faced, while a storm churned inside me. I knew in that instant there was no turning back. At the hospital, Dr. Martinez noted the arrhythmia, the dilated pupils, the dulled reflexes. Victoria, half awake, murmured to the doctor, He did. I leaned close and whispered, No, Victoria. You did this to yourself. The medical staff moved her into emergency. I watched them go, feeling as though I had just set the first stone on a grave. On the drive home, the city lay quiet under a shroud. Streetlights smeared my shadow long across the pavements. I knew then that everything was about to explode. Press, police, lawyers, rotten secrets dug up piece by piece. I was no longer on the outside of this storm. I had started the wheel turning. My father's voice echoed in my head, deep, measured, resolute. He had said, Son, truth never sleeps. It finds a way out, no matter how deep you bury it. I tightened my grip on the wheel and whispered, I will make it surface, Dad, whatever it costs. The next morning, I woke in my small apartment with my head still spinning from everything that had happened. The 6 a.m. news blurted a short bulletin. Wealthy woman hospitalized on suspicion of poisoning. Condition unclear. Just a few words, but I knew that was the first gust before the storm. David called the moment I switched off the TV. We have a search warrant, he said, voice flat and decisive. The judge signed after seeing the evidence I submitted. Police will execute the search this afternoon. Nathaniel, this is the turning point. I gripped the phone so hard my hand trembled. I'll be there. That afternoon, police cars lined the drive in front of the estate. Curious neighbors craned their heads and a handful of reporters had already gathered, cameras poised like circling vultures. I climbed out of the car, heart thudding, and watched every move of the armored officers as they donned gloves and carried evidence cases. The mansion's door opened and the place no longer felt like a luxurious refuge. It had become the threshold of a battlefield. The scented candles were extinguished. The rooms smelled now of damp and chill. Each space had ceased to be a home and had become a scene. I followed them, taking in every detail with my eyes so my memory could file them away permanently. The parlor still displayed its wealth, oil paintings, an antique clock, an expensive Persian rug, but under the flashlights those objects lost their artistry and became silent witnesses. One officer moved into the dining room. The long table still bore the traces of the previous night. A red wine stain had dried into a dark brown, like congealed blood. A shattered glass lay where it had fallen, not yet cleared away. I swallowed hard. The echo of smashing crystal kept ringing in my head. "Anything here?" one of the officers called. He lifted a small glass vial from a kitchen cabinet. The label had been torn away. What remained inside was a pale, grayish powder. I recognized it immediately. My father had a photo of something like this in an old notebook, annotated with a single word: strychnine. A classical poison. Quick, brutal. I turned my face away and clenched my hands to steady myself. They kept searching, drawer by drawer, door by door. In the basement, we found something worse. A heavy iron door had to be pried open. A sharp chemical tang hit my nose, mixed with mildew. Fluorescent lights flickered over rows of wooden shelves stacked with bottles, jars, and burlap sacks. There were old notebooks, pages yellowed with age, filled with formulas, dosages, methods of compounding. Some pages bore brown stains, as if splashed with blood or some other fluid. I picked up one notebook, and my hand shook. Scrawled on the cover in a handwriting I knew too well was her name, Victoria. Forensics called in a specialist team. Cameras flashed continuously, recording everything. My stomach turned like a fist. The basement felt less like storage and more like a chamber of ghosts, memories of my father haunting the place. In a shadowed corner, a battered wooden cabinet was locked with a brass padlock. They forced it open, and inside were thick folders upon folders. Each envelope bore a name and a date. I pulled one out. Robert Hawthorne, 2021. I stood frozen. My hand trembled so badly the folder nearly slipped. Inside were copies of medical records, prescription slips, blood test results, all meticulously duplicated and annotated in red ink. One page even had a scrawled note: "Double the dose to ensure efficacy." I could hardly breathe. The evidence was undeniable. She had monitored my father's health, methodically planning his demise step by step. An officer handed me another envelope. I skimmed the label: Eleanor, 2019. The name clicked. An old housekeeper who had suddenly died in her sleep. I had never suspected anything until this moment. Everything pointed back to Victoria. Each death, each accident, had a pattern, a root. I closed the files and sank into a wooden chair. A cold numbness spread over me. She no longer looked to me like a powerful woman. She looked like a smiling monster in human skin. Police continued to find bottles of brown liquid, packets of white powder, syringes still bearing residue. All of it was bagged as evidence. The rustle of plastic evidence bags sounded like knives slicing through my chest. David came up beside me and put a hand on my shoulder. "Nathaniel, we've got everything. No one can deny it now." I nodded, but my eyes stayed fixed on the folder with my father's name. Rage and a hollow emptiness churned together inside me. I had wanted this day, wanted the truth to come out, but when it finally did, I felt only disorientation. There was no triumph here, only loss. When we left the estate, night had fallen. Blue and red police lights swept over the pale walls, turning the place into a macabre stage. People gathered outside, whispering and snapping photos. I crossed their path, feeling swallowed by 100 staring eyes. In the car, I opened my phone. Messages lit the screen. Reporters, old acquaintances, unknown numbers. All of one question. Is it true? I didn't reply. I turned the screen off and rested my head against the glass as the sirens carried us away. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark with the stack of files I'd taken home on the table. The pages seemed to scream, spelling out crimes that had been buried for years. I flipped through them under the yellow lamp, the red ink jumping at me like fresh wounds. My father's name, Eleanor, and other names I'd never heard before. Victoria had turned a life into her private laboratory and the people around her into lab rats. In that moment, I understood. The real battle had only just begun. Victoria was not dead. She was alive in the hospital and still able to strike back. But with what we'd found today, even if she woke and lied with all the skill in the world, she could not wash the blood from her hands. I closed my eyes, drew a breath, and whispered a promise to myself. Dad, I will bring everything to light. Even if I must face the whole world, I will not back down. The morning the trial began, the Chicago sky was oppressively leaden. Thick gray clouds drifted slowly, as if they too had come to witness the end of someone who had lived under lies for far too long. I stood on the steps of the Cook County Courthouse, watching the cold marble stairs rise before me, feeling a weight in my chest that was equal parts resolve and dread. Reporters pressed in along the entrance, their questions firing at me like volleys. Nathaniel, do you believe Victoria is innocent? Do you think she feels remorse? Are you prepared to face your stepmother in court today? I said nothing. Each step I took felt like a statement. I would not flinch. In my coat pocket, I tightened my grip on my father's notebook, the last piece of proof, the only thing steadying me. The courtroom was bright under harsh lights, the polished wooden benches packed. David sat in the front row with a thick stack of files. And then she walked in. Her eyes swept the room and fixed on me. For a heartbeat, I saw a flash of hatred, instantly masked by a practiced calm. I shivered. The trial opened. Prosecutor Jennifer Walsh, a sharp-voiced young woman, rose and addressed the jury with a line that silenced the room. This is not merely a murder. This is a symphony composed in cold calculation. Each note a dose of poison, every movement a financial plot, and the climax the painful death of Robert Hawthorne. Evidence followed, one piece striking harder than the last. Vials of poison recovered from the basement, amended life insurance policies, meticulous health records. Then the footage from that night in the dining room, Victoria Duchesse's voice faltering as the drug took hold, and me, calm, dialing 911. Clear proof of who prepared the killing. I watched her mouth twitch, saw her hand quiver beneath the table, but her eyes still held that defiant challenge. Then it was my turn on the stand. I faced the jury and said, I grew up with a father who believed in truth. He taught me that data does not lie. People can lie. People hide things. But the numbers betray the pattern. When I saw irregular transfers, when my father disappeared without a word, I knew it was no coincidence. And when Victoria handed me that glass that night, I realized the truth was revealing itself. I walked them through every detail. The faint film on the wine, the switch, the recorder in my pocket, the timed message to David. I spoke slowly, precisely, letting each word lodge in the minds of those listening. Throughout my testimony, I felt Victoria's stare burn into me, as if she wanted to reduce me to ash. I did not look away. I wanted her to understand that the years of manipulation and sweet deceit were over. Jennifer's lips curved in a small, satisfied smile when I finished. She turned and asked the final question. Nathaniel, why did you do all of this? I breathed and answered, for my father's justice, and so no one else becomes a victim. The room held its breath. Only the scratch of pencils recorded the moment. The defense called Victoria. This was their big gamble. She took the stand, her voice smooth at first. Robert loved me. He would never be forced. This is all a misunderstanding. Nathaniel staged this to seize my wealth. Under Jennifer's relentless questioning, the mask cracked. The prosecutor produced receipts for ethylene glycol purchased at 3 different stores, and browser history showing Victoria researching symptoms of slow poisoning. Sweat beaded on her brow. Her voice began to falter. That was for a book I'm writing, a crime novel, she stammered. The courtroom scoffed. The jurors exchanged looks. The excuse sounded paper-thin. Jennifer then held up the handwritten letter Victoria had sent me from the hospital, begging, "Let us be a family." She raised it high and intoned, "An innocent person would not write such a letter. This is not remorse. This is evidence of desperation." Victoria went still, her head bowed, the dyed blonde hair falling to hide her face. The trial ran 3 intense days, but the outcome felt inevitable. The jury returned in less than 2 hours. My heart nearly stopped as the foreman stood and spoke. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Victoria Sterling, guilty of first-degree murder, guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty of fraud." Sound broke loose, sobbed relief, reproachful shakes of the head, the frenzy of cameras capturing the moment. I sat frozen. Hot tears rose unbidden at the corners of my eyes. This was not celebration. It was release. The judge pronounced the sentence, life without parole. The gavel fell 3 times like thunder, ending a storm that had dragged on for too long. I looked toward Victoria. Her eyes were hollow now. No hatred left, only wreckage. Guards snapped the cuffs closed and led her away. She turned toward me once. Her lips moved, but no words came. I didn't need to hear them. It would have been nothing more than a curse. When the courtroom doors closed, I inhaled and felt a vast emptiness open up inside my chest. My father had finally gotten justice, but the cost had been incalculable. That night I went back to my small apartment and placed my father's notebook on the makeshift altar I'd set up. I lit a single incense stick. The smoke curled and blurred the lamplight as I whispered, "Dad, it's done. You can rest now." Still, deep down I knew life would never return to what it had been. Victoria might be behind bars, but the ghost she left behind would cling for a long time.